Okay, so now we're going to be adding some validation. And just like we did before, we are going to do everything from the template. That's the main idea of doing all of this. So right from the start, each item, each input needs to have inside the manifest, inside the schema, a rule for validation. So I'm going to add a comma and I'm going to say validation. And this one is going to be equal to, an object. Now, at least we're going to need to have what we're going to be doing. You can change this in the future. It's up to you. We need to have at least one validation that is going to be required. And this could be either true or it could be either false. So if this one is false, it's not going to validate anything. But for starters, this one is going to be true. The name is going to be required. Good. So then I'm going to do comma. I'm going to be adding more things. I'm going to be adding a rule for valid. So if this, after we do the validation, if this input is valid, we're going to be changing this property. For now, whenever the application starts, it's going to be false. So then comma. We're going to be adding a touched, and we're going to talk about this later, but don't worry, you just need to add it. And then we can have a validation message. After we validate everything, we're going to check if it's wrong, and if it's wrong, we're going to return a message. So we're going to say validation and then message. This could be shorter, but this name makes sense. And when the application starts, of course, this message is going to be empty. We don't have an actual message. Okay, so this is the starting point. We're going to validate first the name. Now the rest of the inputs need to have at least a validation, just like I did right here. So I'm just going to copy all of this validation required and everything else, and I'm going to paste it on the other ones. I'm going to do comma, pasted, this one, comma, pasted, and oh no, let's leave the message and the age, because first we're going to do the validation inside the template. So we're going to just validate the inputs for now, just to make it a little bit faster. So okay, so this one is going to be false for now, just false. And again, if we start false, we don't have any rule. It's going to be valid equals true, of course. Okay, that's good. We're going to just do the inputs first. So now, whenever we the application is going to create this input, we need to start checking whenever we add something inside the input. Whenever I type something, I want to run the validation and check it. So if we go to form fields, right here we have a function that's on change, and we just run the change handler. So inside change handler, we could check the information that we are typing and then just decide if this information is correct or not. That's the main idea. Okay, so I'm going to go right here at the top and I'm going to enter the change handler. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom, and now I need to start checking things. First, I'm going to create a variable that is going to be called valid data. This valid data is going to be equal to true, or it's going to be equal to false, or it's going to be equal to something. So right here, I'm going to make a reference to validate. And this one is going to be a function that is going to be checking if this input and the value we have inside, it's true or false, given the rules that we have right here. So okay, so this validate is going to run some checks on this input, for example, on the name. So right from the start is we need to pass which input we want to check. And if you remember, we have the information inside new state and ID. So if we pass to validate the name and all the information about that input, this validate is going to receive this input in particular. And of course, then it's going to receive this one and then this one and everything else. But right now we're going to focus on this one. Okay, so validate is going to be receiving the, that data. We don't have this function we're going to create right now. So I'm going to say const and then validate. And this one is going to receive that element. So I'm going to say element. And then, of course, we run a function. Okay, that's good. So first I'm going to do console log and then element, just like that. I'm going to save it. And okay, for now we're not gonna get anything. But if I type F, we're gonna get that this console log elements. So we have the config, the element, input, label, and we have touch and valid and everything else. So now we have access to this element, and we can check the validation and change the valid and whatever. Okay, we're gonna do that right now. So right from the starters, whenever we check if it's valid or not, if it's invalid, we need to return something. So we're going to be returning if it's valid. So this one is going to change to true. And if it's invalid, of course, it's going to be false. And then we need, if it's false, this input is not valid, we need to return a message for this. So, okay, whenever the application starts and we type something inside this input, this function is going to run. And right from the beginning, this input is going to be valid. So I'm going to return an array. And you're going to see in a minute why. It's going to be true. And then the second position in the array is going to be something empty. So this position, it's equal to the validation message. So if I save this and run this right now, this input, it's going to be always true. True because it's the valid and then the message. But then what we're going to do, we're going to be doing some checking right here. And at the end, we're going to return this error. All right. And this error is going to be equal to this. But if we do some checking right here and this element, it's not valid, we're going to return false and we're going to return the message. So this valid data is going to receive an array with true or false and the message or no message at all. That's the idea. Makes sense. So right here, I'm going to start doing the check-in, and we do this with just simple ifs. There's nothing magical right here. So we need to access that element and dot, and I'm going to be access validation, just like that. If I go to user, we are entering these key. And now we're going to be checking if I have a required rule. So I'm going to be creating the validation for required. So if we do have an element that calls required and it's equal to true, we want to run some code right here. So first I'm going to create a variable that is going to be called valid. This one is going to be checking if the element it's empty or not. So I'm going to say element dot, I'm going to access the value dot, I'm going to trim it. So if we have a white space, it's going to remove that. And we're going to be checking if this element it's not equal to an empty string. So if we have an empty string, this one valid is going to be returning false. Okay. So I'm going to say const and message, and it's going to be equal, and I'm going to be returning some template strings because of course we want to return a message. We could do this differently, but I'm just going to do it this way. So I'm going to return some template strings. So if the valid, it's not true, it's not valid, we want to return a message. But if it's not, we want to return something empty. So the message for a required is going to say this field is required. Makes sense. Okay. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom and I'm going to say error, and it's going to be equal to not valid. If it's not valid, the error is going to be equal to something, or it's going to be equal to, error, which is the one we have on top. So, okay, let's go again. If we're going to be I made a mistake right here. There we go. So we're going to be checking if this is valid. This is going to be returning true or false. If it's not valid, we're going to return this message inside the variable message. If it's valid, we're not going to return anything. Then this error variable, which is the same we have on top, is going to be checking if it's valid. So if it's not valid, we want to return an array with the new values, not with these ones. But if it's valid, we want to return error, which is equal to true and nothing. So okay, so I'm going to go right here, and first we return valid, which is true or false. In this case, it's going to be, of course, false. It's not valid. And then we return an error message, which is going to be message. Let me make this better. Okay, so now what I'm going to do console log, do right here, and I'm going to be just doing a console log for the valid data variable we have right here on top. I'm going to reload the application, and of course, I'm going to type an F. Now, since we have an F, it means that this input it's not empty. So we have a value, so this input is true, and we have a message of nothing, okay, an empty message. Now, if I delete the F, we're gonna get false because it's not valid, and we get this field is required. Okay, so this valid data is getting an array with whatever we want to render. We want to update the state of the form. Okay, so we're going to be doing the same thing we did right here. We're going to access the data we have right here, and we're going to change the values that we have inside new state and ID. And that is going to be, of course, updating the state. So, okay. So first, we need to access the valid. Right here, we have the valid. We need to change it to true or false, depending on what we have inside valid data. So I'm going to say new state, new, and then state. Then I make a reference to the ID, and then I'm going to access the valid. And now the information that we have right here, it's inside the array of valid data. So I'm going to say valid data, and it's going to be equal to the first position on the array. Good. So now I'm going to copy all this because we just need to change some things. I'm going to be accessing the new state ID, and I'm going to be accessing the validation message. I'm going to be changing that. So validation message. And I'm going to be passing whatever I have on the second position of the array of valid data. Good. So now I'm going to go right here. I'm going to do a console log for the new state. So if I do new state, I'm going to get a console log of the state that we're going to be updating. This new state is going to go to change, and change is going to be updating the whole state of the application. Okay, so if I type an F, I get name, and name is going to be valid, true, and validation message, nothing. Now, if I go back, let me close this, and if I go back and delete it, the next state of name is going to contain valid false, so it's not valid, and we have a message inside validation message. This field is required. Okay, so it's kind of working. So now what we need to do, we need a function that is going to be checking if we do have a message and the input, it's not valid, and it's going to be showing a message right here because that's the main point of this. Okay, so I'm going to go back to form fields. I'm just gonna delete this for now. I'm gonna save it. Now, where can we check if we have a message on the state? We can do it on the template. We can check on the template if we have a message down there and display something or not. So right here at the bottom, I'm gonna create a function that is gonna say show validation. I'm gonna open and close. And we need to pass whatever data we have inside each item, inside the state of each item. In this case, we have it inside values. Remember that we do data.settings. So I'm going to be passing values. We don't have this function so far, so I'm going to be adding the function right now. The function is going to be called const, again, show validation. And show validation is going to receive some arguments and then just render the information. So the argument, I'm going to call it data. You can call it whatever you want. You can pass values or, it's up to you. So right here, what we do, we're going to be returning a message, an error message, if we do have one inside the state. So I'm going to go right here and create a variable that is going to be called error and then message. Makes sense, right? And it's going to be null. For now, it's going to be null. So now what we need to do, we need to check if we have an error message, an actual error message. So we're going to be checking data and then validation, right? We're going to be checking if we have something inside validation, if this one is true. Okay, and then we're going to check something else. We're going to check if the data it's valid. So if it's not valid, it means that we have a message. So we're going to be returning an error message. I'm going to say error message is going to be equal to return some JSX. And then, of course, I'm going to be adding just whatever, class name, and I called it label error. It's going to be on the CSS styles. And inside here, we need to pass whatever error message, whatever message we are adding from the validation right here. And this one, since we are getting right here the new state, is going to be equal to this field required. So if I open and close and say data dot and then validation message, it's going to be rendering whatever message we have there. And then at the end, of course, we need to return something. So we return error and then message. Okay, looks kind of nice, should be working. So if I type an F, of course, we don't have an error message, this is good. But if I go back and delete it, we are passing the information to the state, the application re-renders, and on this new render, we do have an error message. So it's going to detect it right here, and it's going to be showing the validation message that we have inside the new state. So we get this field is required. Now, if I type something, this state, it's going to be valid. So it's not going to be showing a message anymore, and it's valid true. So, okay, it works. If I delete it, we get the same result. All right, that's good. So we're going to be adding more things right here. But, again, this video went too long. Let's go to the next section, the next video, and we're going to be kind of finishing all of this.